Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever episode of Saturdays Rewritten. I'm your host, Garrison Hardy, and I'm excited to have you with me here on this show, this new journey. Before we begin kind of this new string of content, those of you who are used to listening to me on the podcast side of things with my co-host Garrett Thigpen, the show obviously used to be called Game Time with Garrison and Garrett. And there's 59 episodes of that podcast that you can go back and listen to on your various podcast listening platforms. We have Spotify, Amazon, YouTube should be having that now. Wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, you should be able to find it. So we got 59 episodes of content under that name. But my co-host Garrett, he pulled me aside and just said that long term, this isn't something that he was looking to continue, just wasn't super passionate about college sports to put in the research, put in the time and the dedication required of continually pumping out content. Especially, it's a little bit tougher in the off season too. We don't have the games to react to, the live stats to react to, and whatnot. So there's a lot more kind of time and dedication taken into doing that. So, he just said that he didn't really want to continue it long term. So first and foremost to my former co-host Garrett Thigpen, really appreciate you going on that ride of 59 podcast episodes with me, man. That's a lot of people don't even make it past episode 10, according to studies. So the fact that we made it 59 episodes in and actually developed a little bit of a following. Some of our episodes have jumped over 1,000 downloads, which is a big deal. And Garrett and I were able to do that together. And it was a blast, man. So thanks for joining me on that journey. And I look forward to your political content that you'll put out someday, I'm sure. So going forward, I decided that now's the time for maybe a rebrand. I could have kept it, Game Time with Garrison, but that just didn't feel right. This felt like an opportunity to take the show in a new direction and put my spin on it. And, then I just so happened to watch a YouTube video. I believe it was by Think Media, and it just emphasized getting into YouTube in 2025. Now's the year to do it. And I've watched YouTube all the time. I always have something in the background going on. It made sense. Get into YouTube. And so this is still going to be a podcast form. So to you who's listening to this audio version now, you can now find me on YouTube though. We call it Saturdays Rewritten, obviously. And the reason I called it Saturdays Rewritten, by the way, I'm a guy who really loves the history of college football. One game that always jumps out to me in particular is the Texas versus USC game back in 06, maybe 05 or 06. And seeing Vince Young carve up that USC defense to come back from a 38-26 deficit in the fourth quarter. That stuck out to me as one of the best college football games of all time, if not the best. So seeing the history of that, I kind of got into the idea of Saturdays Rewritten because I also kind of like alternate history. So here's an example of a future Saturdays Rewritten episode. What if USC actually beat Texas in that game? And this could be a separate stream of content to where I'm going to be covering the weekly stuff still. I'm going to be reacting to the weekly headlines. I'm going to be reacting to the games as they happen. You're still going to get my takes there, but you're also going to see a kind of a blast from the past. So what if USC beat Texas to take their third straight national title, to get their 34th or 35th straight win? Where would that take Pete Carroll in his legacy in college football? It was already legendary. What if he three-peated? And where would they go from there? What would that have done to Texas? What would that have done to Vince Young's legacy? It could even turn into what happened to big major programs and what happened after key games, and diving into that storyline. The 2007 season, one of the most chaotic seasons in college football. I've brought that up and referenced that if you're one of my podcast listeners you'll remember that I've brought that up numerous times. So eventually I'm going to have to do a deep dive on it. And I want to get into video editing and I want to get into audio editing to truly make this good content for you to dive into. So, all that being said, that's why I came up with the name Saturdays Rewritten. Been a college football fan for as long as I can remember. You can see behind me that Washington State helmet. My dad and I have always been Washington State Cougar fans. Obviously, we're kind of at an interesting time right now in college football realignment in that we are kind of cobbling together a Pac-12 of Mountain West teams and Oregon State and Washington State. And Washington State kind of finds itself in a weird position, one I never thought they would be in. And it's really sad to see the Pac-12 disappear with 108 years of history just gone down the drain. That's really sad. And I'm going to miss the regionality of it. I'm going to miss the Conference of Champions, Pac-12 after dark. You know, there were some really great things, and obviously the Pac-12 would cannibalize itself a lot of the time when it came to big games and teams going on hot streaks. And hey, there's another video for me in the future. All that to say, that is where this new direction of Saturdays Rewritten is going. And I look forward to sharing this with you all and look forward to making this content for you. So without further ado, I do have a show for you guys today, and we do have a lot of good content to get into. And I wanted to get my chance to kind of give my piece on my response to some recent headlines, as well as more of a deep dive into 3 schools that really kind of jumped out to me as we head towards the 25-26 season and whatnot. And obviously, it's only 3 schools. There are tons of other headlines that I could get to, but for now, we'll just keep it to these 3 and go from there. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of, as far as the news goes, you guys all saw Nico Iamaleava took off from Tennessee, and also his brother Madden Iamaleava took off from Arkansas, and they are off to the UCLA Bruins for the next season. Just utter chaos. And I hadn't even heard initially when I was reading the headlines. I had not heard any of the rumblings that Nico could be leaving Tennessee. So it was all brand new to me. And as you all have seen, the details came out that even before the season was over, before their playoff game against the Ohio State Buckeyes, Nico was talking about holding out on the University of Tennessee and not playing against the Buckeyes because he hadn't gotten his valuation of $4 million. He hadn't got that agreement. Tennessee was paying him $2 million a year, and that wasn't enough, according to Nico and his representatives, which, by the way, in my opinion, his representatives kind of screwed him going forward. Shout out to Tennessee for standing up to this. In any case, so as this was playing out, I was stunned. But then as those details came out to where, Nico was threatening to hold out against his teammates, was kind of holding Tennessee hostage. And then Dan Lanning from Oregon actually called Josh Heupel, head coach of Tennessee, and said, hey, just so you know, Nico is shopping around here on the West Coast. Some other teams that were rumored to be considering Iamaleava was Notre Dame, USC, Oregon was in there. And there were a couple other teams too, I think. But he was shopping around to those programs. And Dan Lanning did the right thing, in my opinion, by reaching out to Heupel and giving him the heads up. So that obviously blew the top off the whole thing, and it just really makes Nico look kind of he's really only after the best for himself. And let me be clear, I am of the opinion that players should be getting paid for their services. They should be getting top dollar because for the longest time, the NCAA was profiting off the effort of these players. I did a senior thesis on this, in fact, back in 2012. And at the time, the NCAA had brought in $15 billion. Nowadays, I'm sure with how TV has just exploded, I'm sure that it had gone way up. So I'm all in favor of athletes going out and trying to do right by themselves and take care of themselves, take care of their family. They are the product on the field. They deserve that cut for this name, image, and likeness. But the way Nico went about it was very cutthroat and really stabbed Tennessee in the back. When, from what I've heard out of Tennessee, out of Knoxville, is they went above and beyond to try to accommodate Nico and his team. In that they gave him they had him housed off of campus in Knoxville at a really nice place, and they were trying to bend over backwards to do right by Nico and allow him to live comfortably and pay him $2 million. That's nothing to sneeze at. And some NFL players also came out and said, "Man, you're probably going to have an NFL career. Are you really going to throw all this stuff away at Tennessee for $2 million when in the NFL you could potentially have a long career ahead of you?" It just didn't make sense to me. So I understand UCLA's side of it. They just went out and got a high-profile player who, he did have some good games for Tennessee and whatnot. He can clearly throw the ball. He's got some, impressive arm talent. He's got escapability, pretty good instinct for the most part, except for last year, that Arkansas game where he lost track of time, didn't even give his team a chance to win the game, but I digress. So UCLA, they're kind of wanting to make a name for themselves, probably improve upon their notoriety and whatnot in the Big Ten. So they went out and got him. I get that. But yeah, I think Tennessee did the right thing too. Coach Heupel said of Nico that no player is bigger than the program. And I think that sets a really important precedent in college football going forward, that, we can't have players, can't allow them to play bully ball over the rest of the team. Football is a team sport. It is probably, it's I would argue, the most team sport, in that you literally need the center to snap the ball. The offensive line has to do their job to allow for the quarterback to drop back to pass and survey the field. The receivers have to run their routes correctly so that the different route combinations stick together. When you have a quarterback thinking that way, that he is way above the program, it's just not a good look. So I'm curious to see how the locker room setup goes for UCLA this coming season, especially now that both Nico and Madden Iamaleava are on campus now. I'm sure UCLA quarterbacks are transferring out. So it's just a pretty bad look for Iamaleava. I'm not sure what he's getting paid by UCLA, but I can guarantee you it's not $4 million. His value probably came down a little bit when he made this move. So shot himself in the foot, in my opinion. Elsewhere, Shedeur Sanders. Obviously everybody, you've all seen the commentary. You've all seen how far he's fallen. I personally thought he was going to be, maybe a late first rounder or at least a second rounder. I thought he would go in those first two rounds. But from everything that I've heard, apparently there was a team in the top 10 that was looking, that had Nico come in for a meeting. They had asked him ahead of time to, study the playbook, study their schemes and whatnot. And he just came in unprepared, kind of had a laissez-faire attitude about the whole thing and turned them off. And there was definitely, some pride involved. I mean, your father is none other than Deion Sanders primetime. And, I think Deion is a brilliant businessman. I mean, he's turned Colorado, the Colorado Buffaloes, a program that it's not exactly a powerhouse program for college football. And yet you've got some of the biggest names in the country showing up for these games. And I'm not talking just football. I'm talking about celebrities, both in the football world and in the rap world, in the movie star world. You've seen some incredible names showing up to Boulder, Colorado for a college football game. Deion Sanders has that effect. Meanwhile, you look at other programs like, say, heck, I'll pick on Washington State here. I see Washington State games where not even 2/3 of the stadium is full. Deion Sanders has brought that to the Colorado Buffaloes, when just 2 years ago they were going 1-11, one win, and then they jumped to 4 wins, and then they jumped to 9 wins this year. So Deion's done a good job. That being said, I don't think that he directed his sons in the right way on how to handle this draft. Shedeur, Let's call it what it is. He's very confident. He's very cocky. I think you have to have a little bit of that to succeed at to play this game and to play, heck, even for Shiloh at safety, especially at safety, you got to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. You're supposed to lay the wood on people. But, Shedeur, I think in the NFL, people are looking for guys who are going to be the face of the franchise and, are going to not only impress on the field, but also just carry themselves well off the field. They are putting their entire business, billions and billions of dollars of their business on a quarterback's shoulders. Probably the hardest position on all sports. Peyton Manning has said it himself. And so to entrust all of that to a guy who comes into a team meeting or a meeting, before the draft, and he doesn't even seem to take it seriously, and kind of just has it was more. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it is currently thundering and lightning here. A bit of a thunderstorm here in Huntsville, Alabama, where I'm recording on May 3rd, year 2025, year of our Lord. In any case, yeah, it's not a good look when you come in unprepared, unfocused. You didn't do what they had asked of you, which is to study the playbook. And on top of this, he was more saying, what are you going to do for me to help me succeed? I understand a quarterback needs pieces around him in order to succeed. And of course the team is going to try to put pieces around him and build. That's what the management should be doing. So I just think Shedeur really shot himself in the foot. And ultimately that's why he fell so far, is that, man, you went 9-3. You got smoked by BYU in that the Big 12 title game, or the bowl game rather. Excuse me. Just ultimately, not necessarily deserving of a statue, in my opinion. What about Cordell Stewart? A Colorado great like that. I digress. Shedeur he did some nice things for Colorado. He is worthy of being drafted in the NFL. I do think he can be a successful NFL quarterback. Don't mistake it. But I think this is probably a good learning experience from him. And even Shedeur brought it up, God has a plan. Yeah, I think this was God's way of humbling him and saying, hey, you're not there yet, kid. Let's go out and earn it on the field. And then, then maybe you can start having a little bit more of this bravado. So in any case, that's kind of my take on the whole Shedeur situation. And then he gets sent to the Cleveland Browns, where quarterbacks go to die. And they have such an interesting quarterback room. Deshaun Watson's still there with all his backstory and all his recent drama and his injury struggles and whatnot, his play struggles. They drafted Dillon Gabriel ahead of Shedeur Sanders, and Dillon had some pretty solid moments in college football. I think he was a good college quarterback. I'm curious to see how he translates into the NFL. And then you got Shedeur. You have Joe Flacco, I still think is there. Interesting quarterback room in Cleveland, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all kind of unfolds there. Here's some other news I heard. Texas. The Texas Longhorns have $40 million, or rather, they're expected to spend $40 million worth of NIL money this year. And my initial reaction to hearing that is, good grief. This sets kind of a dangerous precedent in college football, in that it's just going to be, all right, the team that goes out and spends the most money wins. It's almost turning into European soccer, or European football, to those of you overseas. That's not a good look. We're going to have businessmen coming in and, buying college football teams almost. And we're going to have the transfer market, just like in, Europe overseas, where people will come in and buy players and whatnot. It sets kind of a dangerous precedent. But then I peeled it back a little bit more, and ultimately I think a lot of the $40 million will probably be spent on maintaining their current roster, similar to what Ohio State did last year. Ohio State spent $20 million, and Garrett and I actually talked about it on our show in Game Time, with Game Time, where, we saw kind of maybe the danger of Ohio State going out dropping $20 million the most expensive team in college football, and then they win it all. What kind of precedent does that set? Not a good one. But ultimately, a lot of that 20 million was spent on maybe keeping the core guys there. And then they also went out, they did get some pieces like Will Howard from Kansas State. They got Caleb Downs from Alabama. They did go out and make those splashy purchases, but the overall, the 20 million was put in amongst that roster of Ohio State guys who had been there from the beginning in order to just make sure they maintain the roster. And I think we're probably going to see a lot of that with Texas. Yeah, they'll go out and get some guys, they'll go out and get some pieces, but building that core team and maintaining that roster is what a lot of these, NIL deals will be about. On top of this, this is probably because next year going forward, we're probably going to see that cap of 20 to 30 million come over the program. So let's go out and do it one more time for the road, just whatever we want. So that's my take on it. I don't know if that's going to put Texas 100% over the top. They are obviously going to be a contender for the college football playoff this year. We'll do more of a deep dive for Texas later. They're not one of the schools I had on the list this time around, but keep your eye on the Longhorns. Going forward as a program, Texas is really set up for massive success. I mean, talk about some massive NIL deals. Talk about just the brand itself. You got Steve Sarkisian there, one of the best coaches in the country, in my opinion. Even though, I've criticized his play calling in the red zone here and there a little bit. He's a brilliant offensive mind. There's no two ways about it. And he is building a culture down at Texas that is going to draw some of the best players going forward. So Texas is going to be in good shape going forward. Speaking of Texas, let's actually go north to their hated rivals for our deep dive segment here, the Oklahoma Sooners. The Oklahoma Sooners, obviously last year didn't really have the season that they wanted. They went 6-7 on the season for the second time in 3 years under Coach Brent Venables. And the Sooners, in the previous 23 seasons, never had a losing season. So this has been new territory for the Sooners. And on top of that, oh, by the way, you're in the SEC now. So there's that college football realignment. Do you guys remember the Pac-12 almost went out and got Texas and Oklahoma? Me as a Pac-12 guy, I was stoked. But could the Texas Longhorns come to Pullman, Washington to play the Cougs? That would have been cool. But never happened, obviously, because the Pac-12, we had to screw everything up, and just that's why the Pac-12 practically is in ashes and doesn't exist anymore, at least in the way that I would like it to. In any case, so yeah, now they're in the SEC, and it's been a little bit rocky. I remember Brent Venables' first season there. It was a rebuild, and they went 6-7. They showed some good things. Then they went 10-3 the following year, and I thought, oh man, full steam ahead. Oklahoma is here to stay. But then they lose Dylan Gabriel. He goes to Oregon. But then coming in, they have Jackson Arnold, a 5-star quarterback, taking over. And everything I was hearing out of camp was, hey, Jackson Arnold, we could have ourselves a dude. This guy's a baller. He's looking good in spring ball. The team as a unit was looking good. Brent Venables has really improved Oklahoma's defense. Oklahoma defensively, for the longest time, I mentioned those previous 23 years, this was a lot of it, especially with the Lincoln Riley era. They were just turnstiles on defense. You could score 50, you could probably score 40 to 50 points a game against Oklahoma pretty easily. They were soft defensively. That's what I thought of them. But now Brent Venables has turned that around to where defensively they're tough. I think defensively they ranked in the top 20 last year. That's what kept them in that season. Last season, to get back on track, Jackson Arnold and co. really did not have a good year. And they finished 6-7. And, I don't want to come down too hard on Jackson Arnold. He did not really look great. But also remember, they had 8 different offensive line combinations in 9 games. And we all remember the game against Tennessee last year. The Tennessee Volunteers came into town to play at Oklahoma. It was a nationally, the game of the week. You had Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit in the booth. And Tennessee, they looked like the better team. And, Oklahoma kept it kind of close, even though they benched Jackson Arnold about halfway through. And ultimately Tennessee would pull away and win. And the defense did great, but gosh, they were just so depleted, that Oklahoma team. The different offensive line combinations. I mean, I think on 13% of their snaps this season, their quarterback was getting sacked. 13%. That is crazy. Think about that. So, tough year for Oklahoma on that end. Their wide receiving core was decimated with injuries. They just couldn't really. They had a lot of youth out there at wide receiver because they just simply were just hurt across the board. That was kind of their season last year, 6-7. They also had a brutal schedule on top of that. So the fact that they did go 6-7, I kind of take that as a win, even though Oklahoma standards obviously are way up here, understandably so. They've had so much success over the years at their program. So, not saying that 6-7 should be what they're shooting for. I'm just saying, given how the odds were so stacked against them last year, they showed fight. They showed grit. They showed toughness. I think that's a shout out to Brent Venables above everything to keep the ship above. They took on water, but they still made it to shore. So I credit Oklahoma on that end, and the way those players rallied, the way they stuck together. It could have been much worse. So now fast forward to the offseason, where Oklahoma just had to come up to Washington State and take away John Mateer and take away our offensive coordinator by the name of Ben Arbuckle, who's also an incredibly young offensive coordinator. I think he's younger than me, 31 or 32. And I just dated myself. But in any case, Coach Arbuckle, he turned Washington State's offense into a top 15 offense. John Mateer, he threw for over 3,000 yards, 29 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions, by the way. He also ran for 800 yards and 15 more scores. So John Mateer was an offense machine last year. So they bring in those two pieces to kind of take the offense in a new direction. They bring in, they have returning players at wide receiver who are going to, be back from injury. Hopefully they can stay healthy this time around. They do bring in a couple more guys to that wide receiving core to hopefully give Mateer some more weapons. The offensive line, they bring in some veterans. And everything I'm hearing out of camp is good. Oh man, this team looks great. John Mateer, he is slinging the ball around and looking really good. And he is a leader. He is a charismatic leader. That's certainly something I saw at Washington State he's just a likable guy. And the team rallied around him. And I think Oklahoma's getting that too. Jackson Arnold, no disrespect to him. He just seemed, anytime I would see him, he just seemed quieter, a little more reserved. And, you can lead that way, on the football field and just have this quiet confidence about you and whatnot. But it was such a chaos. I think it was just a really bad situation for Arnold, who's now taken off and gone to Auburn. We'll see. Maybe he can revive his career at Auburn with Coach Freeze and what he's trying to accomplish at Auburn. Deep dive for them coming shortly. So, in any case, all the news that I'm hearing out of Norman is the team's looking good. And the defense, I think the defense is going to be solid. Under Brent Venables, that's kind of his specialty. I think the defense will be there. And as a result, I think we're going to see a lot of improvement out of Oklahoma. But Garrison, we heard the same things last year. Oklahoma's looking really good in spring ball. Oh man, Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold, he's maybe put him up there with Caleb Williams. I actually heard that, by the way. It's like, not saying he is Caleb Williams, but I'm just saying he's doing things on the field that I saw Caleb Williams doing. That obviously didn't pan out. So what's different this time around? Well, the difference is I think we've actually seen John Mateer go out and put up those incredible stats, put up those incredible numbers. We have actual college game tape, whereas we didn't with Jackson Arnold. We just didn't have it. So I think John Mateer, he's proven. He's a proven leader. He's a proven quarterback. It's proven that he can go out and lead an offense. And I think that's the difference for Oklahoma. So frankly, yeah, I am a little bit excited for the Sooners. They do have a pretty tough schedule this year. There's no doubt. I mean, you're playing in the SEC, a loaded SEC that, maybe doesn't have kind of those elite teams at the very top, but nonetheless, they have elite talent spread throughout. It is what it is with this conference. And then you still got those hated Longhorns down south that you got to deal with every year. So, yeah, Oklahoma has a really rough road ahead, but they went out and probably got the best guy they could at quarterback to bring him in, along with his offensive coordinator, who's probably going to make this transition for him a little bit more comfortable. So, personally, I understand a little bit of the hype. On top of this, you got a guy by the name of Jim Nagy as the GM for the Oklahoma Sooners. For those of you who don't know, he served as the executive director of the Senior Bowl, and on top of that, he served as a scout in the NFL for 10 years. For over 10 years, that is. So I'm not saying scouts are perfect by any means, but it means that by and large, maybe he has an eye for talent. Not a bad guy to bring as your GM. They also brought in Jaden Ott from California, the Golden Bears. He had over 1,000 yards in 2023. And in 2024, he had to deal with a ton of nagging injuries. And as a result, he just didn't play a ton this last year. But when he's healthy, he is a dynamic threat out of the backfield. And that's just going to give Mateer another opportunity or another release valve, rather. So it's not going to be all on his shoulders. And Ben Arbuckle is a great offensive coordinator. I think he proved at Washington State, turning them into a top 15 offense with the loss of weaponry that we had as a program. And granted, we played a bunch of Mountain West schools. I get that. But still, there's no doubt in my mind that going forward, the Oklahoma's they made some right moves going forward. So, moving on, we've got the Clemson Tigers. I've been hearing a lot about the Clemson Tigers this offseason, and all of it's been good. But before we jump into this year, let's backtrack a little bit. And last year, they went 10-4 on the season, 7-1 in the ACC, and they won the ACC championship. And still, there were people who almost classified that as not a great year. It just the vibe I get out of some Clemson fans, not all Clemson fans, but some of you, the vibe I get is, oh my gosh, we're just not there. It's time for Dabo to go. And he even got attacked and criticized on that radio show by that one caller who called in. And Dabo kind of went off, and then he removed the call-in segment to his show. If my opinion, if I'm Dabo, I'm like, no, let him keep coming. Bring it on. Dabo's record speaks for itself, in my opinion. Let him come. Let him say what they want to say. To me, it's a little bit ridiculous that when you go 9-4, and that's considered an ultimate failure. That just shows how good Clemson has been within the 2010 decade under Dabo. I mean, they've won 2 titles. What more needs to be said? And the main criticism has been, well, he won't do the transfer portal. He's so against the transfer portal. And then he had his take of, well, technically, everyone's a transfer just from high school to college. Even me at the time, I cringed a little bit. And even I have kind of come out and criticized Dabo and like, well, you got to play the transfer game. It's just the new era of college football. You either adapt or die. I had that take. Now that fast forward a little bit to where, Florida State was kind of the beacon of the transfer portal when they blew up and had that incredible run. They go undefeated, then, obviously just heartbreaking when they lose their starting quarterback close to the end of the season. They limp into the end of the season. They barely beat Florida. They barely win the ACC championship. It doesn't look good. And then they miss the college football playoff. That was kind of the gold standard of, see, look what the transfer portal can do. And Clemson's not doing it. Therefore, Dabo's not a good coach. That's kind of the overall vibe I've gotten from the scenario. But like I said, fast forward now, I think Dabo's done a fantastic job of continuing to build the culture at Clemson, to build kind of this identity. And ultimately, the transfer portal, fast forward to the next season where Florida State fell off a cliff and went 2-10 because they were a bunch of talented players on one team that didn't mesh together, and it just fell off a cliff. Now, suddenly Dabo looks pretty smart, saying, yeah, we will go. And they have gone after the people in the transfer portal. They actually signed the players in the transfer portal this year. So there we go, people. But he's going to go after people who fit the culture that he's built at Clemson. And it's a pretty dang successful culture, if you ask me. So Dabo's looking pretty smart at the end of the day. But in any case, the 2024 season, Clemson was good. They won 10 games. They went 7-1 in conference, and they won the ACC title game. They made it to the college football playoff as well. That's a pretty dang good year. Just saying, Clemson didn't scare me like they used to in years past. I mean, they had some. I mean, they lost a bad one to Louisville. They got destroyed by Georgia. They got beat by Clemson, and it didn't, or they got beat by Texas rather, and they hung with them. Fair credit to them, they hung with them, but they just. And actually, I'm looking back. I think they went 6-2 in conference because they finished 10-4. Well, let me just pull my notes up here just to make sure I'm not talking out of my butt. But again, all this to say, to go 10-4, and it's people just kind of get the vibe. Oh, they lost to South Carolina, so that was their other one, and that was a close game, by the way. South Carolina was one of the hottest teams in college football when Clemson lost to them 17-14. It was a hard-fought game. They just didn't scare me like they did in years past, and ultimately that can be traced to their defense. They ranked 69th in total defense last year. They gave up almost 6 yards a play. That's not exactly the formula to winning football. They were 54th against the pass, 85th against the run, so they were pretty porous. 186 yards a game on the ground. That's not Clemson. When I think of Clemson, I think of an elite defensive line and an elite front seven that is going to punish you if you try to run against them. And then they have, NFL players in the secondary and whatnot. And, Clemson still does have NFL talent, let's be clear. But it just didn't feel elite. It didn't feel scary. I didn't fear Clemson. If and 4 other teams didn't. Even in some of their wins, Clemson had to almost limp by. There were some, close games that I thought, really? Clemson? I say all this. What did Clemson do to go out and fix the problem? Well, they went out and got a new defensive coordinator by the name of Tom Allen. Tom Allen was obviously at Penn State last year, and Penn State, they ranked 8th in points allowed last year. 7th in total defense, and 9th in run defense. He also was a Broyles Award winner semifinalist. They held opponents to 14 points or less in 10 games and forced at least 2 turnovers in 9 games. He's also been a head coach, head coaching experience with Indiana, and in 1 year, they allowed 10 fewer points per game and gave up 25 fewer touchdowns in 1 year. So this guy coaches defense, and from what I'm hearing out of Clemson and what I'm hearing out of spring ball and in all the other content creators and shows that I've been watching about Clemson, all I'm hearing is that there's a different attitude on defense, and the main emphasis and focus has been in tackling. We have to be great tacklers. That's what Dabo and Coach Allen have been emphasizing this year. And he has been walking around practice, talking into a microphone with boom boxes so he can talk to the whole defense at once. This is a guy who, had went out and tackled one of his players after they upset Michigan at Indiana. He went out and tackled one of his players, and he got a cut on his face. Because he was just so intense about tackling his player. That's just the kind of guy he is. He is just a football guy. He loves football, and he loves teaching the game of football on defense. Just that in itself was a massive hire for Clemson right there. And according to reports, Tom Allen wanted to take the Clemson job to be closer to family. I guess he has grandchildren, close to where Clemson is. So it just made more sense for he and his family. And to just be a part of the Clemson culture that Dabo has built. It's a massive win there. So I think that's going to be a huge win for Clemson this year. And I think we're going to see that defensively to where they're not going to be 69th. So massive upgrade there. They went out and addressed it, similar to what Oklahoma did. They saw their weakness. They went out and addressed it. And on top of this, Clemson has a lot of returning talent coming back this year. They went out and got a few guys from the portal that are gonna, answer some key areas. And, they have a solid recruiting class coming in. I believe it was 26th from what I saw. So still not elite Clemson level that we're used to saying needs to be addressed going forward. But I think Clemson's going to be in a fine direction. And Cade Klubnik, he stepped up and he looked like a 5-star. That had been one of my criticisms of Clemson was the previous year from last year. Klubnik, there were times where he just didn't look great at quarterback. And that can be, associated with the fact that I didn't think Clemson's receiving core was great. Their offense just looked kind of clunky a few years ago. Not last year. Klubnik looked great, and he put up some really impressive numbers and slung the ball around. He was decisive with it. He's also good on his legs. I think, Klubnik's going to be one of the best quarterbacks this year, and Clemson's going to be right in the college football playoff conversation. They're probably going to be, running towards a potential title run. I think Clemson's probably going to be that good. So keep an eye out on the Tigers. Speaking of the Tigers, let's go to the LSU Tigers. And by the way, these two teams play each other at the very beginning of the year. I've actually looked into tickets to go up and see this game. It's like $400 a pop. So that's a little bit pricey for me. But nonetheless, LSU Tigers have been getting a lot of buzz this offseason. Now, leading up to it, last year they went 9-4. Offensively, they looked pretty solid, but through the air with Garrett Nussmeier, they looked good. And they had some good receivers, and they had an impressive offensive line, and one of them went really early in the first round of the draft. But they also ranked 107th on the ground. So it wasn't a very balanced attack, and that, cost them in a few games, I think. Despite this, they had some big wins. They had South Carolina was one of their big wins. They beat Ole Miss at home. That was a massive win. But probably the low point of the season last year was when their hated rivals, the Alabama Crimson Tide, came to town and just absolutely demolished them. The Jalen Milroe had just his best game of the year that year and ran for almost 200 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground. At one point, that really stuck out to me that year was when Kirk Herbstreit during that game just said, "This doesn't look like an LSU defense. It just doesn't." And he was right. You look at the secondary, that did not look like an LSU secondary that, boasted greats like the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, or Patrick Peterson. Where were those guys? I didn't see anybody like that. The front seven, the defensive line, they just did not really pressure the quarterback very well that year at all. There was nobody. Opposing quarterbacks could already attack their weak secondary, and now couple that with getting no pressure on the quarterback, not a good combo. I think LSU's kind of in a interesting, fast forward to the recording of this video, let's just say. Now LSU's suddenly in a position where they are favorited for the college football playoff. They're favorited they're one of the top picks for the SEC this year. What happened? Well, LSU went out and signed 17 players in the transfer portal, and a lot of them were big-time gets. Basically, anybody LSU wanted, they went out and got. And which is kind of funny because Brian Kelly, he was not a huge believer in the transfer portal, but then they went out and, made it happen. So 17 players in the transfer portal to address a lot of the weaknesses. They have the number 1 transfer portal class this year coming in. But Garrison, you just got done talking about how Florida State maybe relied too much on the transfer portal. You just got done talking about how, you know, the transfer portal isn't a fix-all problem. You still want to have a culture built in, blah, blah, blah. Yes, believe me, I get that. I'm not saying that LSU is automatically just going to go out and put all of this together. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they went out and signed 17 really good ball players who addressed some key weak spots and are going to maybe help bring LSU a little bit more of an anchored team, I should say. They went out and got some guys for the safety position, the cornerback position to address some of those weaknesses. They went out and got an edge rusher in Patrick Payton. He was highly sought after. He won the ACC Freshman of the Year back in 2022. He can ball. He had 7 sacks in 23. Kind of went down in 24 because Florida State had just had a really bad year, to be frank. But he had 4 sacks last year still. So there's a guy who can go out and get the quarterback. They went out and got Nick Anderson from Oklahoma, talented wide receiver, who as a freshman, he set a freshman record with 10 touchdowns in 2023. I would expect him to have a rebound this year because he had a really bad quad injury last year that pretty much kept him out for the whole season with Oklahoma. He just wasn't able to get right. And then when he did come back, he re-aggravated that same quad last year. He's healthy now. And I think he's going to be one of the focal points on offense and just give Garrett Nussmeier, who I think is going to be one of the best quarterbacks this year, give him a guy to throw to. They went out and got Mansour Delaney, a Virginia Tech transfer, 3rd team All ACC at cornerback. And he's a good one. Josh Thompson, a guard from Northwestern, a veteran. He was highly sought after. Tennessee was going hard after him. LSU went out and got him. LSU's having to replace 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. So they went out and got some veteran pieces to put in front of Nussmeier and give him a spot to be protected behind. And that is, I think, ultimately, this is good use of the transfer portal in that going out and getting a veteran who's actually seen game action and whatnot, I think they're going to be able to react a little bit better and plug in a little bit more naturally to a new offensive line than, say, a freshman or an underclassman who's never seen the field. So I think that's good use of the portal there, going out and getting a veteran offensive lineman to help alleviate some of the inexperience that is going to be on that offensive line. They went out and got 17 guys. Some of them just were more for depth and whatnot, which is good. You need that on a team. Brian Kelly, I've been kind of critical of him in the past, but ultimately he's 29-11 and 17-7 in the SEC. And he's been there since 2022. Not a dumpster fire of a situation. He's gone out and won games. He's going to go out and get you 9 to 10 wins. That's just not good enough, though, for LSU. The fans at LSU expect more, and they have the facilities and the history and the tradition to expect more. So I think I wouldn't say that he's on the hot seat. If they start losing games, yeah, he's probably going to be on the hot seat, especially because they went out and got the best transfer class in the country, and people are going to associate that with going out and having some success. And also, they have a solid recruiting class, too. So while that's going to give pieces for Brian Kelly to work with, it's also going to ramp up the pressure. And it's going to be interesting to see, rather, what LSU does under that pressure. Because, again, it's not necessarily a team just yet, just because they went out and got 17 ballers to come in and plug in. There has to be some cohesion and unity with this roster. And it's Coach Kelly's responsibility to get it there and playing shape. I am going to be curious that this Clemson game is going to have a lot of pressure on Brian Kelly's shoulders. He has never won an opener at LSU. Never won an opener, and they've never made a playoff appearance. And yeah, they play in the SEC. The SEC is brutal. But on the flip side, I also think the SEC is more open than it's ever been, in that I don't think you don't have Alabama and Georgia at the top anymore they are fighting over the same recruits like they always have been, but they aren't the 2 clear-cut elite teams out of the SEC anymore. Now, there's a little bit more parity. and whatnot, thanks to this NIL stuff, thanks to the transfer portal. You could go back and forth on whether that's a good thing or not. I'm just saying, there's probably a little bit more parity now, and as a result, that kind of opens the door for LSU, but it also means each game's still as much of a challenge on that end because everyone's just good. It is what it is. So I don't think he's on the hot seat or anything, but if we start running into the same 9-type win season with this much excitement built into the preseason, it's kind of scary. Potential for, calling for him to be fired would probably ramp up pretty big on that end. So in any case, folks, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week. Look forward to covering more college football with you guys. We will see you then. Thanks for watching.